Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the perfumed dusk of a city that no longer exists on any map. The streets are narrow and uneven, lanterns swinging gently in the evening breeze. You trail behind a painted servant girl who says nothing, only gestures, and before you know it, you're stepping through a wooden threshold into another world. The air changes immediately, softer, warmer, heavier with incense, rice wine, and the delicate powder worn only by women who are both performance and mystery. You're in a tea house, but not the kind you've seen in movies. This place is less about the tea and more about everything that happens around it. Silk drapes sway like slow moving ghosts, muting the candlelight into a golden haze. There's the strum of a pipa, played from behind a screen painted with cranes and bamboo. Someone laughs, low and controlled. A man leans forward, then recoils slightly, either from embarrassment or the rising price of his pleasure. You're here for a reason, though it may not be clear at first. You've arrived in the world of the Yiji, the high-class courtesans of ancient China, more than entertainers, not quite concubines, never truly free. They are the lords of an empire built on metaphor, rhythm, silk, and calculated charm. And you, tonight, are their newest recruit. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, if you're listening from somewhere interesting, post your location and local time. I love seeing how far this sleepy little channel travels. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet ache from the wooden sandals. You've been walking since the city gates closed at dusk. You're just another nameless girl in a borrowed robe, stepping nervously onto oiled floorboards. Your future tied up in a red ribbon hanging from your sash. Someone ties it tighter as you pass. Is it affection? Ownership? Even you aren't sure. The woman who greets you is ageless. Her face holds years in the way her eyes move, slowly, calculating. She smiles with one side of her mouth and beckons you forward. She's called Big Sister by everyone here. She's not related to anyone, of course. She gives you a name. It's not yours. It's prettier, softer, more forgettable. A name to wear like earrings, like perfume, like armor. Little Plum Blossom, she says, trying it out on her tongue. That'll sell. You're led past rooms where women in pale robes sit on embroidered cushions, reciting poems by candlelight to men who nod as though they understand. There's no nudity, no touching, at least not yet. This is not a brothel. Not technically. You'll learn later that lines here are always blurred, boundaries negotiated in poems, gifts, and metaphors so complex even the patrons pretend to be confused. The first room you're shown to is barely wider than a coffin, a rolled-up mat, a basin, and a thin screen painted with peonies. This will be home for now. You're allowed 2 hairpins, 1 change of robe, and 1 broken ceramic teacup with a crack shaped like a crescent moon. You will grow oddly fond of that crack. At dinner, you sit in silence and eat too slowly. The rice is cold. The pickled plum makes your lips pucker. Another girl snorts at you and whispers, "Eat like someone is watching you," because they are. And they are. Big Sister is watching from the corner. So is the older courtesan with the scar hidden by a red bead earring. So is the man behind the bamboo screen who hasn't touched his tea. You'll learn fast that this world is built on performance. The tea house is your stage, your trap, your school. And every gesture, how you pour wine, how long you hold eye contact, how delicately you refuse and advance, must be rehearsed to the point of instinct. Later that night, as the girls are summoned one by one to entertain, you're left behind. No one chooses you yet. You're the new one. Too raw, too obvious. But that's okay. You sit behind a silk screen, pretending to read, while a girl sings a haunting ballad about a crane that forgets to fly south and dies in the snow. A man claps once, politely. The girl leaves with him. She doesn't look back. You're alone again. You don't sleep well. Too many noises, laughs, footsteps, coughing. You pull the covers over your head and try to remember your mother's voice. You can't. Only the shape of her hands, the way she smelled of garlic and worry. This isn't what you expected. Not exactly, but you also don't know what you expected. Freedom, maybe, or safety, or at least something prettier than the mud of your old village. You got silk and candles and tea, but you also got rules. So many rules. Still, part of you is curious. Who are these women who float like petals but speak like generals? Why do rich men listen to them, laugh at their jokes, and then give them gold for saying almost nothing at all? Historians still argue whether the Yiji were truly powerful, or simply given the illusion of it, allowed to speak poetry only if it pleased their patrons. But tonight, watching the oldest courtesan dismiss a drunken merchant with a single raised eyebrow, you suspect the truth might be more complicated, you. And in this candlelit world, where everything is layered, faces, names, meanings, you realize something else. You're not here just to survive. You're here to learn, and learning begins tomorrow. You wake before the sun dares peek through the rice paper windows. The room is dark and cold, and someone has already taken the wash basin. You fumble your way down the narrow hallway to find another, your feet still unsure on the polished wood floor. The house is quiet, but not asleep. In this place, sleep is never quite full. It arrives in fragments, stolen between shifts, held close like a secret. You kneel beside a shallow basin and splash your face with water that bites with morning chill. Beside you, another girl is brushing her teeth with a twig and humming an old folk tune, something from the countryside, something you both pretend not to recognize. Today is your first real lesson. You're no longer just the new girl tucked behind the screen. You've graduated to the bottom rung of performance. And no, you won't be reciting poetry or pouring tea. Not yet. You'll be dusting the instruments, folding silk sashes, and memorizing the names of every important patron who might walk through the doors tonight. There's a chart in the main room, tacked discreetly behind a screen of phoenixes. It lists men by title, not by name. The Plum Minister, Scholar of the North, Widowed General. Beside each title are cryptic notes like likes riddles, drinks too fast, or do not bring flowers. You commit it all to memory. You're also given your first etiquette scroll. It's not a scroll in the dramatic sense, just a worn strip of fabric with hand-stitched characters that read, "The courtesan does not ask, she offers." Big Sister says it's one of the old rules. There are hundreds of them. Some contradict each other. Some only make sense when you're already in trouble. Today, though, you're mostly observing. And what you observe is both enchanting and exhausting. One girl is learning how to tilt her head just slightly when laughing, not too much, not too little. Another is practicing how to pour wine without looking at the cup. It's a dance, a ritual, a form of magic that turns awkward silence into longing. You overhear lessons in calligraphy, where one girl is scolded gently for making her love character look too cold. Make it tremble, the teacher says, like it wants to be touched but won't ask. Another girl is learning to play the guccine, her fingers moving slowly over the strings as if afraid they might snap. The sound it produces is both melancholy and dignified, like a whisper from a dream you weren't supposed to remember. And then there's the fan lesson. You didn't know how important fans were. They're not just for cooling oneself or for flirtation, they're language. One flick means, come closer. Another means, you may speak. And closing the fan slowly while looking down, that's practically a marriage proposal. You will soon spend hours practicing fan movements in front of a mirror, trying not to poke your own eye. By midday, your stomach growls so loudly that a passing courtesan offers you half a steamed bun and a smirk. New girls get no lunch break, she teases. Hunger sharpens the mind and the waistline. You laugh politely, but you eat the bun, slowly, with gratitude. Later that afternoon, you help prepare the tea room for the evening. Each cushion must be fluffed, each incense stick perfectly aligned. One girl sprinkles flower petals on the walkway, not randomly, but in a pattern designed to look effortless. Everything here is designed to look effortless. That's the hardest part. You find yourself lingering near the dressing room, not quite inside, not quite outside. It's a sacred space, a chaotic one. Boxes of jade bangles, rouge palettes, tiny pots of crushed pearl powder. The women argue gently over who gets which shade of lipstick. You notice one courtesan applying eyeliner with a brush made from weasel fur, her hand steady as stone. For longevity, she mutters to herself. No one questions her. Big sister calls you over and asks you to recite one of the poems you were supposed to memorize last night. You panic for a heartbeat, then murmur the lines with trembling breath. She listens, nods once, and walks away. That's how praise works here. By evening, the mood shifts. The air smells of plum wine and possibility. Lanterns are lit in stages. First the hallway, then the courtyard, then finally the room of arrivals. The guests trickle in like rain, government men, scholars, wealthy merchants, and on rare occasion, a warrior with a quiet temper and too many rings on his fingers. And here's where you start to see the difference. A concubine is chosen, a courtesan chooses. At least, that's the fantasy. In truth, both are confined. But a courtesan's cage is gilded, and sometimes she holds the key, if only briefly, if only to unlock someone else's desire. You hear whispers that courtesans have influenced politics, that in certain eras, like during the late Ming Dynasty, men would rather quote a Yiji's opinion on a poem than attend court. Historians still argue whether this was real power or simply distraction. But here, in this house, it feels real enough. You help serve the guests tonight. You don't speak. You bow. You listen. You observe. One courtesan spills wine on a guest's sleeve, and he laughs. Not because he enjoys being clumsy, but because she made it seem like an accident wrapped in charm. She leans in, whispers something, and he gives her a coin the size of your palm. Later, you see her roll her eyes when he isn't looking. At night's end, you help clear the dishes. One of the older girls passes you a folded fan and says, "Sleep with this under your pillow. It belonged to someone lucky." You nod, though you suspect it's just a superstition. Still, you do it, and you dream, not of escape, or home, or love, but of lanterns that never burn out and silk sashes that float just out of reach. Morning again, but this time you don't fumble. You find the basin first, splash your face before anyone else, and even steal a sip of warm tea from the kitchen before the older girls catch on. Small victories. You're learning the rhythm. Your third day begins, not with chores, but with posture drills. Yes, posture. You're shown how to sit on your heels with your spine perfectly straight and your hands folded in your lap, fingers relaxed, but not limp. The posture says, I am calm, but it also whispers, I'm watching everything. You hold it for what feels like an hour, until your legs go numb and your toes begin to hum angrily. An older girl smirks at your discomfort. Try it in platform shoes. Next time, she says, gesturing to the corner where a pair of red wooden sandals wait like torture devices from a museum. You'll get to those later. Today's focus is training, deep, refined, painfully graceful training. You're learning to walk slowly, purposefully, like your body is part of the music. Every step is measured. Courtesans don't just walk, they drift. They appear around corners like moonlight sliding along the edge of a silk curtain. You're also handed a scroll filled with the four arts: Qin, music; Qi, go; Shu, calligraphy; and Hua, painting. Not that you're expected to master all of them, but you must understand them. Pretend convincingly. Nod wisely. You learn that even the pretense of education can be seductive when paired with a smile that tilts just so. This is what separates you from a concubine. Concubines are chosen for their fertility and obedience. Courtesans are chosen because they can flirt with a philosopher without embarrassing themselves. Or him. Usually, you spend an hour trying to tune a chin. Its strings protest your fingers like moody cats. The older teacher, whose eyebrows seem to have been painted on in permanent judgment, sighs often. Let the notes breathe, she says, as though the instrument is capable of exhaling. Later, you're handed a calligraphy brush that feels heavier than a sword. You dip it into a small stone bowl of ink and write your new name, Little Plum Blossom, on thin rice paper. The strokes wobble, one line sags. It looks more like shriveled fruit twig, but the teacher says nothing. Improvement is assumed. Eventually, then comes Go, the game of black and white stones, a game of silence, of long pauses, and feigned disinterest. It's not about winning, really. It's about appearing clever while someone else contemplates their next move. You watch two courtesans play for hours, not saying a word, their fingers resting just above the stones like hawks circling prey. You'll get to practice one day, but not yet. For now, you refill the tea and study the strategy behind every sigh. But painting is where you surprise even yourself. They give you a brush, a square of silk, and a pot of green ink. You paint a single bamboo shoot bending in the wind. The older instructor peers over your shoulder and grunts. Not quite praise, but not dismissal either. You've held a brush before? She asks. You shake your head. Then who taught you to hesitate like that? You're not sure if that's a compliment. It stays with you, though. The way she said hesitate, like it was a skill instead of a flaw. After class, you walk with a courtesan named Moth Orchid. That's not her real name, Akuse. Of course, Maki, but she's had it so long it might as well be. She's tall, sharp-tongued, and wears her rouge like armor. You're learning fast, she says, sipping cool tea from a bowl she refuses to share. They'll notice soon. You ask if that's good? Depends who notices, she says. not unkindly. Then she adds, "But don't get cocky. Learning grace is easy. Learning when to use it?" She taps her fan once against her palm. That takes survival. The rest of the day is spent learning etiquette so obscure it feels like a joke. The proper way to refuse a gift 3 times, then accept. How to compliment a guest's poem without implying it's better than yours. Say it's delicately rustic. How to bow from the waist without actually bending your spine. Trickier than it sounds. You practice for hours. Your cheeks ache from polite smiling. You also hear your first scandal. A senior courtesan was caught giving a patron her real name. A massive breach. Names here are power, vulnerability, leverage. Giving yours away is like removing your robe in the marketplace, not forbidden, but deeply frowned upon. The patron was banished. She was too. You ask what happened to her. Moth Orchid shrugs. Maybe married. Maybe gone. Maybe just found somewhere they don't ask so many questions. Historians still argue whether courtesans had any real autonomy, whether their cleverness and artistry ever outweighed the cage they lived in. In theory, they were women of elegance and mystery, not sex workers. In practice, the line was thinner than a brushstroke. You end your day massaging your fingers, bruised from the chin strings. You tuck your practice bamboo painting under your mat. Maybe you'll do better tomorrow. Sleep comes more easily now. You've begun to adjust. Your body remembers the steps even when your mind doesn't. But in the quiet, just before you slip away into dreams, you hear it. A woman's voice, soft, behind the screen. She's practicing a poem you haven't heard before. It ends with the line, "I dance not to delight you, but to forget the stillness." You don't know her name. She probably wouldn't tell you, even if you asked. But you memorize the poem anyway. You wake to the sound of combs scraping through tangled hair, not harsh, rhythmic, calming, even. In this house, even grooming is a ritual, and morning routines are performed with a sort of dreamy discipline. No shouting, no rushing, just the soft clink of porcelain bowls, the hush of silk robes being adjusted, and the quiet vanity of women preparing for battle. Your battle is a brush, a small one, carved from bamboo, with bristles fine enough to shape your eyebrows into elegant crescents. You kneel before a polished copper mirror, squinting at your reflection in the dim light. Your fingers aren't used to the delicate touches yet. The first time you apply rouge, it's too bright, too clownish. You wipe it off with your sleeve and try again, blending until your cheeks look like they've blushed from secrets, not makeup. A courtesan named Azure Peach passes behind you. She doesn't stop, just murmurs. Your left brow curves too high, unless you want to look constantly surprised. You adjust. Mirror time is serious business here. You're not just painting a face, you're crafting a persona. The difference between shy flower, mysterious widow, and witty scholar's muse is often one flick of eyeliner. You watch others at work, painting their lips in precise hearts, dusting their necks with crushed pearl powder to catch candlelight just so. One woman dots her earlobes with a bit of perfume and claims it makes men lean in closer when they speak. You believe her? Bathing is equally theatrical. Water is carried in pails, warmed over a charcoal brazier. You're allowed 2 buckets, no more. There's an art to using jasmine-scented soap without wasting a drop. You learn that courtesans Scrub their elbows with salt, apply camellia oil to their ankles, and steam their faces with chrysanthemum tea. You try it all. Your skin smells like an herb garden and feels like a peeled lychee. Not a bad trade. Then comes hair. Oh, the hair. Long, heavy, and political. You're shown how to twist it into knots that signify availability, class, and mood. A double coil might mean don't approach. A low chignon with a silver pin suggests I might let you pay for my poetry tonight. Courtesans don't just wear ornaments, they weaponize them. A misplaced hairpin has ended more than one dinner prematurely. Your hair isn't long enough for the elaborate styles yet, so you borrow a switch, a false braid looped into your own. It itches, it pulls, but it earns you nods from two senior girls, and that feels like winning a battle without lifting a fan. Breakfast is minimal, congee, pickled vegetables, and tea. The idea isn't to be full, the idea is to be light on your feet, your thoughts clear, your stomach politely concave under your robe. You've already learned to decline a second helping gracefully. The servers don't even ask anymore. Mid-morning is for polishing. You help clean musical instruments, dusting the guccine with a rabbit hair cloth, rubbing the pipa's frets with oil-scented fingertips. One of the older girls, Magpie, tells you about a courtesan who hid love letters inside a hollow flute. She blew secrets into the air, Magpie says with a smirk. Her patron was a governor. His wife eventually found out. What happened to the courtesan? You ask. She disappeared. Might have been promoted. Might have been drowned. Magpie shrugs. Depends on which version you prefer. Later, you help fold and scent the robes. Each girl has her own preference. Orchid sachets, sandalwood chips, or plain rice paper to absorb moisture. There's a hierarchy in how robes are stored. The most favored courtesans have their silks draped instead of folded, to avoid creases. You hope one day you'll earn such an indulgence. By midday, you're exhausted. But Big Sister calls a mirror meeting. Yes, a mirror meeting. Everyone gathers in the largest room, where a massive bronze mirror rests behind gauzy curtains. You're instructed to sit, posture perfect, and observe. One by one, the courtesans step forward and recite lines of poetry, perform fan dances, or play a short melody. The mirror isn't just for reflection, it's the silent judge. Your goal is to impress the audience without watching their reactions. You must look at yourself, perform for yourself, and act as if the mirror is the only truth. It's harder than it sounds. When it's your turn, your hands shake. You recite a couplet you practiced all night, something about plum blossoms in winter. You focus on your reflection, try to soften your eyes, and make your voice flow like warmed honey. When you finish, no one claps. But Big Sister tilts her head and says, "You didn't stutter. That's something. It's the highest praise you've received so far." That night, as the teahouse fills again with perfume and conversation, you notice the older courtesans leaning in front of the mirror before they leave. Some adjust their earrings. One kisses her reflection softly on the cheek. Another simply closes her eyes. You wonder if they're practicing for the guests or for themselves. Historians still debate whether courtesans saw themselves as empowered performers or victims of elegance. Did they embrace the artifice or merely survive it? Tonight, watching the flicker of candlelight dance on your own carefully painted face, you think, maybe both. You don't perform tonight. You're still in training. but Big Sister lets you pour tea for the women after hours. It's quiet. The air is thick with the afterglow of laughter and lute music. Moth Orchid tells a joke involving a scholar, a goose, and a wardrobe, none of which you understand, but you laugh anyway. And in that moment, surrounded by tired women in half-removed makeup, sipping tea and rubbing their sore feet, you see something real, not seduction, not elegance, just survival, wrapped in rouge and wrapped again in silence. You clean the teacups slowly, carefully. One of them has a chip, shaped like a crescent moon. You don't mention it. You just place it gently back on the tray and smile at your reflection. The first time you serve tea to a guest, your hands shake just a little, not enough to spill, but enough that the cup clinks against the saucer with the sound that feels louder than a drum beat. No one comments. The guest barely notices. But you do. Every movement is supposed to be deliberate, fluid, effortless. Today, your grace still has edges. It's a quiet afternoon, which is rare. Rain has begun to fall in soft, steady sheets outside, making the floorboards creak and the paper windows bulge inward with wind. The city slows in the rain, but inside the tea house, things are just warming up. Rain means more patrons. No one wants to be wet and alone. You're summoned not to the main hall, but to the smaller room, reserved for scholars and men who want conversation more than performance. You've practiced this. Kneel just so. Hold the cup with both hands. Bow slightly before extending your arms. Pour from the right. Always the right. The man across from you is old enough to be your grandfather, dressed in scholar's robes that smell faintly of camphor and old books. He eyes you, but not hungrily, just curiously. You're new, he says. You nod, keeping your eyes respectfully downcast. Can you read? He asks. You answer softly. Enough to get in trouble. He chuckles. That's a win. He pulls a scroll from his sleeve and begins to read aloud, a poem about spring rain. Naturally, you refill his tea when appropriate, smile when the verse demands it, and keep your posture relaxed but alert. These men aren't here to be seduced. They're here to be admired for their intellect. Your job is to be the perfect audience. Not too eager, not too dull. Like a mirror that reflects just a little softer than the original. After he leaves, he offers you a coin and a folded note. The coin you accept with both hands. The note you slide into your sleeve when no one's watching. Back in your quarters, you unfold it slowly. Just a verse, a tiny poem. Tea steamed the glass, your silence, louder than thunder. It's not brilliant, but it's yours. The other courtesans tease you gently. The old ones always write poems. Magpie says, wait until the generals come. They can barely spell their names but think they're poets in bed. You laugh, but it sticks with you. This note, this first imprint, you keep it under your mat. Tonight, you are invited to serve in the main hall. No more shadowing. No more pouring for other women. You're dressed in a robe of deep plum silk, borrowed, of course, and your hair is tied with a ribbon that matches your lips. You are trembling, but you hide it behind a fan. There are 4 guests tonight, merchants from the south, all flushed from wine and eager to be entertained. The other courtesans do most of the heavy lifting, jokes, riddles, a short performance on the guqin. You sit slightly behind Moth Orchid, refilling cups, nodding on cue, laughing where it's safe. But at one point, One of the men turns to you and says, "And what's your specialty, little Plum Blossom?" All eyes turn. You freeze. But Moth Orchid saves you. She pours the most poetic cup of tea in the house. She says, straight-faced. The men laugh. One of them lifts his cup and says, then let's taste some poetry. You lean forward, pour with perfect form. This time, your hands don't shake. They clap politely. You feel like you've passed some invisible test. Later, you ask Moth Orchid why she covered for you. She shrugs. Everyone gets one rescue, she says. After that, you're on your own. You think she's joking, until she walks away. That night, you're finally allowed to sit in the tea preparation room during post-evening reflections. It's quieter here than the laughter suggests. The women rub their feet, sip cold wine, and talk low, not gossip, debrief. What worked? What didn't? Who's getting too much attention? Who's starting to fade? One courtesan tells the story of a tea ceremony where she deliberately spilled a few drops on her own hand, just to draw the guest's eyes down, away from her tired face. It worked. He gave her a jade ring by night's end. Distraction, she says, is sometimes more powerful than beauty. Historians still argue whether courtesans had true artistry, or if their skills were exaggerated by romantic tales. But here, watching these women dissect the timing of laughter and the angle of a fan flick, like generals planning a siege, you know better. They are artists. They are tacticians. They are performers whose stage is made of fleeting glances and fragrant steam. You begin to understand the unspoken rule. Everything is choreography, even the stillness. As you prepare to retire for the night, Big Sister stops you in the hallway. Not bad, she says. Don't smile so much. Makes you look like you're trying too hard. You nod. She disappears behind a curtain. You smile anyway. Back in your room, you place tonight's coin beside the note from the old scholar. You fold your robe with reverence, slide the ribbon into a cloth pouch, and place everything just so. You lie down, the scent of tea and plum oil clinging to your skin. Sleep doesn't come quickly, but it comes gently, like pouring the perfect cup. You're barely awake when Big Sister taps the wooden screen outside your room with the edge of her fan. Just once. That's the signal. A double tap would mean trouble. A triple tap would mean run. You dress quickly, your hands finding the folds and sashes by habit now. The robe is pale green today, modest, calming, neutral. You'll be practicing couplets, she says, not even looking at you. Try not to embarrass the ancestors. Great. Poetry drills before breakfast. You follow the other girls into the garden courtyard, where the moss is still damp and the stone benches always slightly colder than they should be. In the middle stands a peach tree, out of season, stubbornly bare, and beside it is an old man, with a beard so long it has its own personality. This is the poetry tutor. He says nothing for a full minute, just stares at you all while petting a kitten on his lap, a kitten that does not belong to the house. No one knows where it came from. But it's always there during poetry lessons. You've learned not to question these things. He begins the session with a couplet and points at you. You blink. He repeats it slowly. Bamboo shadows sweep the stairs, yet leave no dust. You're supposed to offer the matching line. A parallel image. Same rhythm. Similar tone. You panic. Say the first thing that floats up. Moonlight fills the hall, but touches no walls. He grunts. A good grunt, you think. The kitten sneezes. Your heart slows down. The morning passes in a fog of imagery and improvised metaphors. You hear phrases like swallow's sigh, ink-smeared dreams, and clouds with broken legs. Some are beautiful, some are nonsense, but all of it matters. The courtesan life is wrapped in verse. You're expected not just to appreciate poetry, but to produce it, elegantly and instantly. You must be clever, but not sharp, witty, but never cruel. If you embarrass a guest with your superior intellect, you lose the game. If you're too dull, you never get invited to play. Magpie, seated beside you, leans in and whispers, "When in doubt, use plum blossoms. They work for everything. You test this later when practicing fan calligraphy. Your fan is blank, save for a single brushstroke, your trial canvas. You write, plum petals fall, not from wind, but from longing. It's not groundbreaking, but Magpie reads it and nods once. You'll do. That afternoon, Big Sister calls you into the upper room. This is unusual. It's where private audiences take place, the kind that require a different kind of performance. You're not being sent in, not yet. Just watching. Inside, a courtesan named Snow Lantern is playing the guqin, while a patron, dressed in velvet so rich it looks illegal, listens with closed eyes. You're here to observe her transitions, how she moves from one song to another, how she speaks between melodies, how her fan rests on her knee like a guard dog. After the guest leaves, Snow Lantern turns to you and says, "Never end a song in silence, always with a whisper, a note, a word, something. Otherwise they fill the silence with their own thoughts, and that's dangerous." Later, you ask her what she meant. She smiles. A guest who thinks too much might remember they're paying for company. You return to the main hall and begin your next lesson, how to decipher poems brought in by guests. Yes, that's a thing. Some men carry verses in their sleeves like invitations. Others ask you to compose one in response. It's a poetic duel, but no one's supposed to win. One man once arrived with a riddle disguised as a poem. My walls are soft, my gate unseen. Enter with silence, leave with ache. You're told the courtesan who replied was offered a horse and a townhouse by morning. Her answer, I knock with sighs, I step with care. What I steal is never returned. You memorize it instantly, just in case. Historians still argue whether these poetic exchanges were true art or elaborate foreplay. But in this world, the difference hardly matters. A well-timed metaphor can mean the difference between a coin and a contract. That evening, you're not performing, but you're allowed to float, to circulate the rooms silently, observe conversations, learn the dance of words. You hear a courtesan coax a guest into reciting one of his own poems, then sigh in admiration so convincingly you almost believe her. You see another pretend to misunderstand a line just to get him to explain it again, drawing out the conversation, keeping the wine flowing, the attention focused. You even witness a rare rejection. A young guest, barely old enough to grow a mustache, offers a crumpled verse and is gently told, "That's lovely. When it's finished, bring it back." He leaves smiling, unaware he's been dismissed. Later, over leftover buns and wine lees, the courtesans trade favorite lines of the night like gossip. One shares a haiku she wrote mid-conversation without the guest even realizing. Another confesses she once recycled a Tang Dynasty couplet and passed it off as her own. "He cried," she says, smirking. "Told me I had the soul of a sage." Everyone laughs. You sip your tea and try to store it all, every line, every gesture, every trick wrapped in elegance. Because in this house, you don't just learn to write poems, you learn how to live inside them. Evening again, but tonight you're not just practicing, tonight you're earning. Big sister hands you a fan, plain paper, not silk, and says, "You'll serve the three merchants from Hangzhou. Don't try to be brilliant, just don't embarrass us. No pressure, right?" You bow and step through the screen into the receiving room, where the fragrance of osmanthus wine floats in the air like a subtle warning. The three men are already deep into their second pot of liquor. They speak loudly, laugh easily, and wear enough gold to ransom a minor noble. You kneel smoothly, pour tea without hesitation, and greet them in the soft, polite tones you've been trained to use. "Ah," says the one with the round cheeks. "A new blossom. We are honored. You know the dance now. Accept the compliment. Deflect with grace. Offer something better. I am only the stem," you murmur, smiling faintly. "The other ladies are the petals." It works. They laugh. Someone claps. You're in. You're not expected to perform music tonight, just to speak, to charm, to keep the table balanced between indulgence and admiration. This is where the economics of allure begin. You start to see it clearly. Time is money, attention is currency, and wit is the hidden tax that no one sees coming. Every word must return investment. They start testing you, as men often do. "Tell us a proverb." One says. "Only one?" you reply. "I have a small basket of them. Do you prefer something salty or something wise?" They laugh again. Coins jingle softly in a silk pouch. Then another tries a common trick. He offers you a gift, a golden hairpin, too elaborate to be tasteful. You do as trained. You refuse 3 times. "Oh, you're good," he chuckles. "Just like they said." There it is. That little shiver of satisfaction. Word has gotten around. You're no longer a blank slate. You're an investment. Later, when they stumble off toward their sedan chairs, one leaves you a poem on the table. It's terrible. Something about peaches and moonlight and longing. You keep it anyway. The other women gather around you in the hallway afterward. "How much?" someone asks. You count the coins in your sleeve. Enough for new perfume, maybe even your own embroidered slippers. Instead of the communal ones that always smell like old tea leaves. Moth Orchid gives you a knowing glance. Next time, hold out for silver hairpins. Gold is too obvious. You nod like you understand, though you don't. Not yet. Later that night, in the back room where the ledgers are kept, you finally learn the numbers. The bookkeeper, a tiny woman with wrists like bird bones, lets you peek at the accounts. Every courtesan has a page, not their real name, of course. A symbol, a nickname, a sketch. Your page has been added. A tiny plum blossom inked in the corner. Each guest's visit is recorded in neat columns. Time spent, services provided, gifts given, coin received, commission extracted, yes, commission, the house gets its share, your robe, rented, your tea training, billed, even the pillow you sleep on is amortized across your first 10 earnings. You do the math. You owe more than you own. You're not paid in coins, the bookkeeper says without looking up. You're paid in reputation. You lie awake that night, doing silent calculations. How many nights for freedom? How many poems until your debts disappear? And what happens when you age out of metaphor and moonlight? Historians still debate whether Yiji were slaves in silk or entrepreneurs with calligraphy pens. The truth, as always, is somewhere between. You are a performer paid to blur the lines of reality so thoroughly that even you can't tell what's real anymore. But tonight, something shifts. You see the game board. And for the first time, you wonder what happens when you start playing for yourself. The next morning, you ask Big Sister about private patrons. She raises one penciled brow. Already? You say nothing. Just wait. She sighs. There are rules. Of course there are. Private patrons can offer exclusive arrangements, monthly payments, gifts, even the promise of eventual freedom. But they're risky. Tie yourself to the wrong man, and you end up hidden, forgotten, or worse, owned. You have potential, she says finally. Don't waste it on the first man who rhymes jade with maid. You laugh, but it's hollow, because now you know the truth. The house is not just a tea house. It's a marketplace. And you are the product, the merchant, and the salesperson, all in one. But the cleverest girls? They become the accountants, too. That night, when the room is dark and quiet, you run your fingers across the calligraphy practice cloth folded under your mat. You whisper a couplet, just for yourself. They weigh my worth in ounces. I measure theirs in glances. It's not for sale. Not yet. The first time you see a contract with your name on it, well, your stage name, you feel a strange tightening in your chest. It's not fear, exactly. It's not even surprise. It's a strange blend of reality and performance, the paper smelling faintly of ink and sandalwood, as if that makes it softer. You're told it's standard, a record of your debts to the house, a ledger of all the money invested in your training, your robes, your makeup, your meals. You don't even argue. You sign it with the same brush you've been using to practice poetry. Just like that, your body officially belongs to the house. But of course, it's never just about your body. The courtesans here operate in layers. There are those who trade in flirtation, others in music, a few in elegant mystery, and some, rare, enviable, who trade in control. The courtesan known as Ink Bell is one of those. You watch her with the kind of admiration usually reserved for generals or tigers. She never raises her voice. She never repeats herself. Men hang on her every word, as if even her silences are worth quoting. She rewrote her own contract, someone whispers to you one afternoon, as Ink Bell passes in a cloud of musk and ivory silk. Got a better cut, her own quarters, even picks her own guests. It sounds like myth, but the bookkeeper confirms it with a tired nod. She's smart, knows how to say no while making them think it was their idea. You want to be her, not just admired, but protected by reputation, untouchable because no one dares try. But you're still learning the basics. Today's lesson is about boundaries, not the kind written in ink, but the kind you perform with every breath. Where you sit, how far you bow, whether your hand lingers when you offer the wine cup. These tiny decisions add up, and they protect you or expose you. You're taught how to politely deflect touch, how to redirect a wandering gaze with a laugh, how to lean just enough to flatter, but not enough to promise. It's exhausting. And tonight, it gets tested. A guest asks for you by name. That's new. You're sent to the ink room, where scholars usually gather. This one isn't a scholar. He's a landholder from the north, young, broad-shouldered, reeking of ambition and musk oil. He smiles too easily, compliments you too freely. He calls you clever girl before you've said a word. You serve tea. You recite a poem. He asks you to sit closer. You don't. He jokes. Ah, shy like a butterfly. You respond. Only if butterflies wear armor. He laughs, but it's not the warm kind. It's the kind that says, "We'll see." When he leaves, he hands you a silver hairpin and says, "Think of me." You don't take it. He leaves it anyway. You place it on the shelf in your room and stare at it all night. A gesture of interest? A symbol of future trouble? Both? You don't ask Big Sister. You already know the answer. The next day, Magpie shows you her own shelf of gifts. Bangles, pins, tokens, folded poems. These aren't presents, she says. They're reminders. Debt disguised as affection. You start noticing who accepts gifts and who returns them. Who keeps a man waiting and who gives him an answer too soon. Reputation is currency here, but so is ambiguity. Historians still argue how much autonomy courtesans truly had, whether they could refuse guests, whether they could walk away, whether contracts were chains or shields. In some dynasties, they were practically government licensed. In others, they operated in shadows and loopholes. The house runs like an empire of its own. There are hierarchies, rules, informal pacts between courtesans to protect one another, or sabotage. It's not always glamorous. You hear quiet weeping behind a curtain, a girl who misread a guest's mood, a promise made and broken, but you also hear laughter, triumph. A younger courtesan who tricked a guest into reciting an off-color poem in front of a censor. He turned so red I thought he'd explode like a plum in summer, she says. Big Sister warns you, some guests want more than conversation, some want control. You can give them a little, just enough to feed the illusion, but not too much. Never let them forget they are renting a performance, not owning a soul. That phrase stays with you. Renting a performance, not owning a soul. It becomes your private mantra. You revisit the silver hairpin. You wrap it in cloth and place it in the bottom of your lacquer box. Not on display, not accepted, not refused, just observed. You are learning. Tonight, you sit with 3 guests and manage to hold their attention without ever speaking above a whisper. One says your eyes remind him of the lake in Suzhou. You smile and say, "Still, and deeper than you think." He stops talking for the rest of the evening. You walk away with 2 coins and a poem written on rice paper that smudges slightly where he sweated through the ink. You're beginning to collect them. Poems, looks, near mistakes, small victories. You're beginning to understand that your body is a costume. Your words are currency. And your silence is power. The folding screens aren't just decoration. You learn that quickly. They're barriers, filters, walls of suggestion. They keep secrets, shape rumors, and let you hear just enough to be dangerous. Behind them, laughter becomes mystery. Whispered arguments become legend. A fallen hairpin becomes a scandal. Tonight, you're stationed near one, partly to observe, partly because you're not yet ready to take center stage. And so you sit silently, pretending to organize poetry scrolls while actually eavesdropping on a conversation between an older courtesan and a guest you recognize as the Lantern Magistrate. He visits often, always in the same red brocade hat, always smelling faintly of rain and sour plum wine. He leans close to the courtesan, snow lantern again, and murmurs something about a dispute at the salt market. You catch only pieces. Smuggled. Bribes. Missing shipment. Not in the ledger. You pause. You've been around long enough to know this isn't flirtation. This is business. Dangerous business. And Snow Lantern? She's not flustered. She's calm. She refills his cup and replies with a quote from a Tang poem that, when translated delicately, means, "You should be more careful with your words in your pockets." Later, as she walks past you, she says nothing, but her fan lingers just a little longer over her lips. A warning? A message? You're not sure. You learn that courtesans, especially the seasoned ones, are often listeners first, entertainers second, guests, once drunk and comfortable, speak freely, too freely. It's not uncommon for tax collectors, guards, and officials to share sensitive information between poems and toasts. And when that information drips through the silk screens and into the ears of women trained in memory and subtlety, it becomes leverage. Big Sister calls it the invisible ink. Every word spoken here leaves a stain, and some girls learn how to read it better than others. There are rumors that courtesans have played roles in uprisings, blackmail, even espionage. Historians still argue how true those stories are. Did a courtesan really delay an invasion by seducing a general? Did one pass secrets to a rebel disguised as a scholar? No one can prove it. But the stories persist. And in this house, stories are sometimes more powerful than facts. You begin to notice the signals, a certain phrase whispered too quietly, a question that isn't really about poetry, a gift wrapped in too much silk. These things mean something. One night, you're asked to serve wine to a man called the Bronze Inkstick. That's not his real name. Obviously. Here, important men are given nicknames, often unflattering ones. He's a clerk in the Ministry of Works, with hands stained from too much ink and eyes that dart like a sparrow's. He doesn't drink much, but talks too fast. As you pour his wine, he mumbles something about bridgestones going missing and someone needing to disappear. You keep your face blank. You refill his cup, but your mind is racing. Later, when the guests leave, you mention it casually to Moth Orchid. She doesn't look surprised. He talks too much, she says. He'll get himself killed one day. Or worse, demoted. Then she adds, but you were listening. That's good. From that night on, you're asked to observe more often. You sit in the corner of rooms, quietly serving tea, blending into the decor, but you notice everything. Who leaves with whom, who pays in coin, and who offers favors instead, who seems afraid, who smiles too wide. You begin keeping a mental notebook, not for blackmail, just safety, power. One afternoon, Big Sister calls you aside. There's a man coming tomorrow, she says. Don't flirt. Don't joke. Just listen. He thinks he's clever. Make him feel cleverer. You nod. The man arrives dressed plainly, but with polished boots. Always check the boots. That's where the money shows. He's young, confident, careful. He speaks in proverbs and rhetorical questions. If a wall listens, is it guilty of knowing? He asks. You smile softly and reply, only if the wind forgets to pass it on. He seems pleased. Later, he drops a folded note into your sleeve. When you read it, it's not a poem. It's a coded message. Names, numbers, dates. You don't understand it fully, but you understand enough. You don't keep it. You burn it before bed, just in case. That night, Snow Lantern slips into your room without knocking. She closes the screen behind her and sits beside your mat. You wait. You handled him well, she says. You nod. She places something beside you, a pendant, a jade cicada. For silence, she says. You understand. In ancient China, cicadas symbolized rebirth, but also quiet endurance. They live underground for years, listening, waiting, then emerge for just a brief song. You wear it under your robe the next day. From that point forward, you're trusted with more discretion. You're told where to sit, when to speak, when to vanish. And in the quiet hours, when the rooms are empty and the candles low, you begin to see it clearly. Courtesans are not just entertainers. Some are archives. Some are vaults. Some are weapons. You don't know yet which one you'll become, but you're starting to listen more carefully, even when no one's speaking. The first love letter you ever receive comes folded like a tiny bird and tucked inside a mooncake box. Not a red envelope, not a flower, a mooncake box. It's absurdly romantic and completely impractical, which, as it turns out, is exactly the point. The note is written in graceful brush strokes, deliberately smudged at the corners, as if the writer held it too long or hesitated before sealing it. The words are a cascade of metaphors. You are the dusk mist over a mountain, the warmth in the last sip of tea, the echo of a lute string long after the music ends. You reread it twice before realizing it's unsigned. Of course it is. That's the game here. No direct confessions, no plain truths, only coded affection, symbols, and elegant misdirection. You've stepped into the world of fan language and perfumed paper, where love is expressed through suggestion and a wink, not through declarations. You bring the letter to Moth Orchid. She glances over it and snorts. It's either the lantern magistrate or the smelly poet from Suzhou, she says. They both have terrible taste in mooncakes. You ask what to do. She shrugs. Write back or don't. But if you do, make sure your reply can be read 2 ways. That's the trick. So you write back. Carefully. You choose pale yellow paper and scent it with osmanthus oil. Your characters are delicate, each stroke rehearsed. The breeze that stirs the curtains knows not whether it is welcome. Still, it lingers. You leave no name, no title. You fold the paper not into a bird, but into a lotus, and tuck it into the folds of a guest's robe as he leaves, not knowing, not caring, if he's the right man. Because in this house, letters aren't always for the recipient. Sometimes they're for the walls, or the rivals, or yourself. Soon after, you begin to receive more letters, some clumsy, some lovely. One is simply a silk handkerchief embroidered with the character for dream. You keep that one tucked in your robe like a charm. You learn that words are currency, that a well-placed compliment can gain you an ally, and a well-worded insult, if subtle enough, can ruin a competitor for weeks. Snow Lantern teaches you a new game, the art of intentional misunderstanding. When a guest offers a compliment that borders on lewd, you respond with wide eyes and a misreading so innocent it forces him to retreat. Ah, you say my cheeks are like peaches. How kind. Though, I fear, I bruise easily in the sun. If he presses further, you simply pause and ask, do you enjoy botany? And steer the conversation into the joys of cultivating actual fruit trees. The trick is to always appear to have missed the implication. Never confront, never scold. Let them stumble over their own awkwardness. Fan language becomes your second dialect. A fan held open at chest level. Attention. A slow close with downward eyes. Demure decline. A flutter to the left. Flirtation. A flick upward. Caution. Drop deliberately? Well, that depends on who picks it up. You begin to choreograph entire conversations with nothing but your eyes and your fan. It's a dance. One that rewards the bold and punishes the obvious. One night, you're sent to a gathering of literati, all men who've spent too long reading Tang Dynasty verse and not enough time speaking to actual women. They come armed with scrolls and metaphors. You come armed with a blank fan and a sharpened smile. They ask your opinion on a poem comparing a woman's voice to snow on bamboo. You tilt your head and say, "Snow melts, bamboo does not." The room goes quiet for a heartbeat, then explodes in laughter. The man who wrote the poem laughs the loudest, as if you've honored him with the insult. You've learned now. The best reply is one that cuts, then kisses the wound. You start composing your own verses, not for guests, but for yourself. Lines, hidden inside hair combs, sleeves, under your pillow. If silence is the price of mystery, then let me become unreadable. Some nights, you write responses to letters you never received. Some mornings, you burn them before breakfast. Historians still debate the extent to which courtesans influenced literary trends, whether they simply echoed the poetry of the time, or quietly reshaped it from behind silk screens. But here, in this house, it's obvious. Poets borrow from courtesans. Courtesans borrow from poets. The line is a loop. The dialogue never ends. Big Sister begins asking you to edit poems for the younger girls. "Too much moon," you say once, returning a draft. "Not enough shadow." They groan, but they listen. Eventually, guests ask for your poems. Some even memorize them. One man claims your couplet helped him win a provincial exam. Another says he whispered your lines into a lover's ear to win her heart. You never ask if it worked. You don't need to know. Because you're learning that the goal isn't to be understood. The goal is to be remembered. And in this world of shifting glances and perfumed half-truths, the written word lingers longer than the body ever could. You begin keeping a notebook. Nothing too obvious. Just a thread-bound folio tucked under the floorboards of your room. In it, you copy your favorite lines. Yours, others, doesn't matter. The notebook isn't for fame or legacy. It's insurance. Because if this house ever burns down, you want to leave behind something they can't pawn or forget. Your words and your name, the real one, written once, carefully, at the bottom of the last page. When word spreads that an imperial official is coming to the house, everything changes. The cooks triple their efforts, the perfumers work overtime, and even Big Sister replaces her usual fan with one made of gold-threaded silk. No one says the word emperor. That would be too risky, too improbable. But the implication hangs in the air like incense. The visitor is someone important, very important. And tonight, every cushion, every robe, every smile must be flawless. You are not assigned to serve him, of course. That role goes to Inkbell and Snow Lantern, the senior courtesans, the ones who've already memorized the habits of men who can sign death warrants with a frown. But Big Sister pulls you aside all the same. You'll be near, she says. Close enough to learn, but not close enough to ruin anything. Which is fair. The guest arrives late, carried in a covered palanquin flanked by silent guards. You catch only a glimpse, a tall man, with the kind of posture that suggests a life of being bowed to. He wears midnight blue robes embroidered with cranes. His shoes are spotless. Even his silence has authority. He does not speak often. He lets others speak for him. A servant relays his preferences. Another adjusts the cushion behind his back without being asked. And still, the courtesans flutter around him with the practiced ease of women who've danced on thinner ice. You serve the room, quietly, elegantly, one teacup at a time. You notice how Snow Lantern never sits taller than him, even when standing. How Inkbell drops her gaze just before he speaks, not too soon, not too late. Every move is calculated, reverent, but not subservient. They are performing humility, not surrender. That's the difference. And then, unexpectedly, he addresses you. You, Plum Blossom. What's your name? You blink. Everyone pauses. You bow deeply. This one is called Plum Blossom. Your Grace. He smiles faintly. I asked for your name, not your title. A test. You respond as taught. Names are gifts, and I am not yet worthy to unwrap mine in such company. There's a pause. Then he laughs, a short, low sound like a crack in a frozen lake. The courtesans relax again. You have passed. Later, you hear whispers that he has asked about you, that he liked your stillness, that you pour tea like a thought sliding through a dream. It's nonsense, but flattering nonsense. You begin to understand the stakes. When imperial guests come, everything is recorded, not just in ledgers, but in memory. If you impress the right person, your life can change. A title, a position, a favor owed. There are stories of courtesans summoned to court. Some became imperial concubines, others advisors. A few disappeared. Historians still argue whether these women wielded real influence, or whether they were simply ornaments with excellent timing. But in this house, you prepare as if every guest is a gate, and the right smile, the right poem, the right moment could unlock something bigger than freedom. But gates swing both ways. That night, as the guest leaves, he pauses at the doorway and looks back. You a potential, he says to the room. Not to you, not to anyone in particular, but somehow you feel the chill of it settle into your bones. Big Sister doesn't speak to you directly afterward. She simply adds a small crane pin to your lacquer box. It's old, with a cracked pearl eye, a sign. You were seen, Magpie tells you later. Not chosen, not dismissed. That's the best outcome. You nod, and privately, you exhale. The next day, the house returns to normal, mostly. The younger girls clean twice as hard. The senior courtesans sleep until noon. The cooks curse with more creativity than usual. But the air feels different. You've been near power now. Tasted it like the faint trace of plum wine left in the bottom of a cup, and you're not sure if you're hungry or afraid. In the quiet of your room, you write a new poem. He drank nothing, but the silence spilled down his throat like tea. You don't sign it. You just fold it, slide it into your secret folio, and press the crane pin gently between its pages. Because here's what they never tell you. Sometimes, being remembered is more dangerous than being ignored. By now, you know the weight of a rival's gaze. It's heavier than gold, colder than jade. It doesn't need to be accompanied by words or even a wrinkle in the fan. You can feel it from across the courtyard, through gauze screens and perfumed smoke, as surely as if it were a slap. Tonight, that weight is coming from Azure Peach. You can feel her watching as you rehearse a new dance for an upcoming poetry banquet, a slow, rippling movement meant to mimic plum blossoms falling on water. Your steps are too careful, you're so... Your sleeve catches on the screen. You're still learning, still raw. And yet she watches as though you've stolen something. Later, in the dressing room, she brushes past you a little too closely, her lacquered comb catching in your sleeve tassel. "Oh," she says with that high, practiced sweetness. "Still using the trainee robes? I suppose they suit you." You smile gently. "They remind me where I began." She doesn't reply. She doesn't need to. That's how rivalries begin here, not in outbursts or shouting matches, but in compliments with too much sugar and shared glances sharp enough to slice tangerine peels. You didn't mean to step on anyone's toes. You were just learning, just surviving. But the house is small. Attention is limited. The more your name gets whispered at the door, the fewer times someone else's name does. And that, apparently, is war. Magpie gives you a warning one evening as you pass her in the bathhouse. "Peach doesn't like to lose," she says simply. She once faked a nosebleed to interrupt a rival's pipa performance. Claimed the music pierced her key. You laugh. She doesn't. She's already planted the idea that you're too eager, that you copy the older girls, that your charm is rehearsed. You want to shout, "Of course it's rehearsed," but you don't. Instead, you nod, and that's when you start playing defense. You begin adjusting your performances, sharpening your smile, changing your cadence. Subtle differences, enough to look like growth, not mimicry. You ask Snow Lantern for a different poem to memorize, something Peach hasn't performed yet. You borrow a new fan design, water lilies instead of plum blossoms. You don't confront. You don't accuse. You do what courtesans have always done. You revise the performance. But Peach doesn't stop. One night, a guest comments that you remind him of Azure Peach when she first arrived. Harmless compliment, right? Except the next morning, your robe is missing, and your comb, the one moth orchid gave you when you passed your first test. It isn't in the laundry. It isn't in the dressing room. It isn't anywhere. You don't say anything. Oh, you just wear your plainest robe that night and smile anyway. Your fan work is flawless. Your couplet earns a coin. But inside, your jaw aches from clenching. After the guests leave, you return to your room to find the comb placed neatly on your mat. Nothing else is touched. That's the message. This time, you were watched. You go to Big Sister, not to accuse, but to ask for a transfer. Different hall, different guest set, a little space. She raises an eyebrow. "We don't run from fans in rouge," she says. You keep your eyes down. "No, but even plum blossoms grow better when not in the shade." She stares at you for a moment, then chuckles. "You'll be fine," she says. She only tries to cut the ones that can climb. You take it as permission. The next night, you speak first, at the tea gathering. Not loud, just a moment ahead of Peach, enough to set the pace. You praise another courtesan's poem publicly, loud enough for the guests to nod in agreement. Later, the same courtesan tells you quietly, "Thank you. Peach always rewrites my endings." You don't say anything, Just press her hand and smile. Then, at dinner, you mention a new poem you're working on, a riddle, really, about mirrors and jealousy. You don't name names. You don't need to. That week, Azure Peach falls ill. She skips 2 gatherings, returns with eyes that don't meet yours. Historians still debate whether courtesan rivalries were exaggerated by romantic fiction, or whether these power plays were part of daily survival. But here, in the warm light of oil lamps and under the thin veneer of shared laughter, you know better. No one wants to destroy anyone. That would be crass. But to outshine, that's practically expected. And slowly, you learn to wield your performance as both shield and blade. Your fan, once just a prop, becomes a veil, your robe a statement. Even your silences begin to shimmer with meaning. One evening, a guest bows to you first when entering the room. Azure. Peach smiles at you from across the hall. Too wide. Too long. You bow in return, your expression as soft as silk and twice as hard to read. And when the music begins, your steps don't falter. Not even once. You're barely through your second song when Big Sister appears behind the screen and crooks a finger. No words, just a look. This is not part of the routine. You rise, bow to the guests, and follow her through the side corridor, past the dressing rooms and into the stone-walled chamber where fresh flowers are sorted and wine is quietly diluted. She doesn't speak until the door is closed. He's back, she says. You don't ask who. You already know. The man with the polished boots and the rhetorical questions. The one who handed you a note with coded names and left you burning it in the dark. The would-be official. The not-quite spy. You've thought about him more than you'd admit, mostly in the form of worst-case scenarios. And here he is, again. He asked for you, Big Sister adds, calmly. Of course he did. You ask if you must go. She shrugs. Not yet. Just be visible. So you return to the main hall and begin floating. Not hosting, not serving, just existing where eyes can find you. He sits across the room, sipping silently, pretending not to look. You do the same. He leaves without speaking, but later that night, your robe, your best one, is found draped over the garden screen, wet with dew, and wrapped around something heavy. It's a scroll, unmarked on the outside. Inside, a list of names, some circled in red. You show Snow Lantern. She glances once, then says, burn it, or memorize it, but don't keep it. You ask if she's seen lists like this before. Everyone sees something, eventually. She replies, the question is, are you the vault or the leak? You burn it. Again. You think that's the end of it? Until 3 days later, you are summoned to a teahouse outside the city, under the pretense of a private engagement. Big Sister approves the trip. You are escorted by 2 quiet servants who carry more than tea sets. Inside, it's the same man. No guards. No smiles this time. He sits you down and speaks plainly. You hear things. You see things. I need someone like that. You reply just as plainly, I'm not for hire. He nods. No, but you are for listening. He offers no threats, just information, mentions a rival house, a missing girl, a patron who's not who he claims to be. You memorize it, every word, then return to the house with a smile, bow to the guards, and resume your shift like nothing happened. But you don't sleep well that night. And the next morning, the teahouse is quieter than usual. A patron is missing. No one speaks of it. You're starting to realize that the courtesan's world is not just wine and verse. It is also surveillance, and the house operates like a network. The girls are messengers, analysts, security, without uniforms, without weapons, just memory, intuition, and endless practice at pretending nothing matters. Big Sister tells you later, we're not spies, we're filters. What we pass on is choice. And now you have choices. You begin to keep two sets of notes, one in your secret folio, poems, metaphors, coded fragments, the other only in your mind, names, patterns, events. You're not selling secrets, not yet, but you're learning how they move, how they change hands, how power is traded through whispers, not scrolls. One night, Moth Orchid leans in during a shared performance and murmurs, someone's asking about you outside the gates, a courier, dressed like a monk. You nod. What did you tell him? She smiles. That you were too busy reciting poems to see the moon. That's her way of saying, I bought you time. You spend that evening in your room, robe unbelted, comb, resting beside a candle stub, trying to decide whether survival means silence, or learning to speak very, very carefully. Historians still debate how many courtesans truly became spies, whether they were agents of emperors or pawns of factions. But here, in the still hours between music and sleep, you understand that espionage doesn't always come with daggers and disguises. Sometimes it comes with a fan, a poem, and a look that lasts 1 second too long. That night, you write a verse. The mouth said nothing, but the teacup tipped a little too soon. You do not show it to anyone, but you place it in your lacquer box, right next to the jade cicada. You don't know who's watching anymore, but you know you are, and that may be enough. You've long since stopped thinking of beauty as simple. Beauty here is a system, regulated, cultivated, sustained with alarming precision and more than a little danger. It's not just about what looks good, it's about what sells good, what glows in candlelight, what makes a man forget the problems he walked in with, and remember you. Your mornings are now filled with rituals that would terrify an alchemist. You begin with your face, steamed with chrysanthemum tea, gently patted with rice bran water, and then powdered with crushed pearls, so fine it floats like mist. You hold your breath as you apply it. One inhale too deep, and your lungs would sparkle. And that's just skincare. Your lips are dyed with the juice of safflower petals, your brows inked with soot and mulberry paste, your cheeks pinched until they ache. The rouge is dabbed with silk, not fingers. Your hands must stay clean for the fan. Even your nails are painted, each one tipped with a pink so pale it only shows under lamplight. Magpie introduces you to a new practice, mercury blush. You hesitate. She shrugs. A little mercury brightens the cheeks. Too much. You'll glow in the afterlife. You decline. For now. Your hair is another beast entirely. It's soaked in camellia oil, brushed with combs made from ox horn, and then twisted into a shape so precise it requires 2 other women to assist. You try a new style tonight, one favored by high courtesans in Hangzhou, twin buns with lacquered sticks, and a gold thread tied like a secret. It makes your neck ache, but the effect is devastating. You walk past the younger girls, and even they pause. One mouths, "How?" You smile, carefully. Then come the garments. You select a robe dyed in wisteria, edged with indigo waves, and lined with bamboo silk so fine it shimmers when you move. The sleeves are long enough to hide a fan, a letter, and a knife, if you ever needed one. You don't, not yet. Your scent tonight is ambergris and sandalwood, mixed by a former imperial perfumer who now hides in the guest quarters and accepts payment in wine. He dabs a drop at the base of your throat and mutters, "Too good for this place." You say nothing. You've heard that before. But the thing about beauty, especially here, is that it's a trap. Your reputation rests on it. Your earning depends on it. And the moment it fades, even slightly, you feel it in the weight of the glances, the angle of compliments, the shift in who gets invited to perform. One courtesan, once the star of the house, now spends her evenings arranging flower trays. Not because she's less skilled, but because a single pox scar blemished her cheek last winter. No one said a word. They just stopped asking for her. She still applies her makeup, still powders, still smiles, but you can see the effort now. And the fear, so you begin collecting recipes, not just for perfume or rouge, but for protection, folk mixtures whispered from girl to girl, honey and pearl to keep the skin soft, vinegar rinses for shine, ginseng masks, snake fat for supple hands. You try them all, experimenting like a silent apothecary. One night, a guest comments, "You look younger than last week." You bow, murmur something poetic, and mark it as a victory, but the pursuit of perfection costs more than time. One morning, you find a girl collapsed beside the makeup shelf, her breath shallow, her fingertips pale. She'd used an experimental paste said to lighten the skin overnight. It worked. It also burned. She doesn't return the next day. No one asks where she went. Big Sister says quietly, "Let beauty serve you, not own you." You repeat it to yourself like a mantra. And yet, when the pipa master suggests a hair tint, just a rinse of black walnut bark to deepen the shine, you agree. The following evening, you catch your reflection in the bronze mirror and barely recognize yourself, not because you look different, but because you look unreal, like a painting, a story, a figment, and that, perhaps, is the goal. Historians still argue how much effort courtesans truly spent on appearance, whether their famed elegance was exaggerated by later storytellers or a practical reality, but they never had to hold a paintbrush trembling over their own eyelid, praying the rouge didn't smear or the powder didn't poison, because here, beauty is not indulgence, it's insurance, and it's fragile. So you write a new verse. The face they praise is painted twice, once in light and once in fear. You fold it into your sleeve and glide into the tea hall, where the lamps flicker low and every eye turns as you enter. Tonight, you are luminous. Tomorrow, who knows? But for now, they see you. He arrives after midnight, long after the guests have left, when the lanterns burn lower and the tea house smells more of ash than jasmine. His name doesn't appear in the registry. No coin is passed. No music plays. And yet Big Sister lets him in without a word. You're summoned far not with the usual fan flick or screen tap, but with a whisper. Plum Blossom. He's asked for you. You follow the dim corridor to the red chamber, one of the private rooms reserved for moments that don't belong in the ledger chair, the ones that live only in memory, or sometimes not even there. You step inside. He sits on the cushion already, one knee bent, hair damp from the rain outside. He wears no hat, no brocade, no rings. His robes are simple, linen gray. He doesn't look at you, not at first. You kneel, quietly. Wait. Finally, he speaks. You look different. I change every night, you reply. He smiles. You never say the same thing twice. You don't. That's the rule. You offer him tea. He accepts, but doesn't drink it. Just holds the cup in both hands like it's warming more than his fingers. He tells you a story, not a flirtation, not a riddle, not a veiled compliment wrapped in metaphor. Just a story of a brother who died in the southern floods, of a village that no longer exists, of a poem he wrote at 16 that he keeps in his shoe, folded beside a dry chrysanthemum. He doesn't cry, but his voice cracks once, and for the first time. You do not perform. You do not quote. You do not entertain. You just listen. The hour passes in silence. He leaves you with no gift, no fanfare, only a soft thank you, and a bow that's a little too deep for his station. After he goes, you stay, still kneeling. The red chamber is warm, but your hands feel cold. Not every encounter leaves you bruised. Some leave you heavier. You write nothing down, but you remember. The next day, you hear nothing of him. The books don't mention the visit. The other girls don't ask. It's as if it never happened, but later, in your room, you find something beneath your pillow, a single pressed chrysanthemum, folded into the shape of a crane. You tuck it into your folio, carefully. You don't ask questions. You don't send a reply, because sometimes meaning is enough. That evening, a guest from the coast asks for entertainment, loud, boisterous, surrounded by men who laugh too hard and drink too quickly. You switch gears. You become sparkle and tease, eyes darting, laughter just loud enough to be memorable. You sing, you play, you recite a poem so ridiculous it makes one man choke on his dumpling, and all the while, you feel the pressed crane in your sleeve like a heartbeat. Later, Moth Orchid pulls you aside and whispers, "You've changed." You smile. Only slightly. She nods. Slight is safest. But you both know it's not really about safety anymore. Because once someone sees you without your performance, the echo lingers. You begin to notice the difference now. The guests who want laughter, who come to forget, and the guests who come hoping you'll remember them after they're gone, who speak not to impress, but to be understood, just for a moment. Historians still debate whether courtesans loved sincerely, whether real emotion was possible under the weight of performance and payment. But here, with the candle wax dripping slowly beside your sleeping mat, you understand the answer. It's not whether you can love, it's whether you can risk it. Because if you do, you start listening for footsteps when the house is quiet. You start folding your robes with more care in case someone returns to notice. You start writing verses you never intend to share. He left no gold, no name, only silence, where my mask used to sit. Big sister never asks about that night, but 2 days later, she places a new robe in your room, white silk, with faint blue embroidery at the collar. No one else in the house wears anything like it. You wear it at the next gathering, and when a guest compliments it, you reply, "It was a gift from someone I forgot." A small lie, a necessary one, because memory, in this world, is currency, and yours is growing heavier by the night. You begin to notice the women who disappear, not dramatically, not with weeping or farewells, just subtly. One day, a robe is missing from the laundry line. A favorite teacup isn't returned to its shelf. A cushion in the corner remains undented for too many nights. No one talks about it, not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. If you ask too many questions, you imply you might be next, or worse, you might care. Still, you count, in your head. While brushing rouge onto your cheeks or waiting for hot water, you tally the names of those who've vanished. Silent Orchid, who used to cry when playing the pipa. Swallow's Tail, who once told you a love story with no ending. And Paper Moon, whose laughter always came a beat too late. You ask Moth Orchid once, softly, "Where do they go?" She doesn't look at you, just says, "Away." But away can mean many things. Some are married off, usually to merchants too rich to be suspicious, or officials too guilty to say no. Some vanish into private estates, more concubine than companion. Others, it's whispered, fake illnesses, pay off their debts with bribes, and vanish into the countryside under a new name. A rarer few are bought out by patrons who mean well, until they don't. There's one rumor never confirmed of a girl who staged her own death using pig's blood and a borrowed silk slipper. Supposedly she runs a teahouse now, near the lake, no questions asked. You don't know what to believe. But you know, you're not the only one wondering. One evening, after a gathering, a guest slips a folded card into your hand. No poetry this time, just a question, written in tidy characters. Do you wish to leave? You stare at it all night. You don't sleep. When morning comes, you burn it, not because you've decided to stay, but because you haven't decided yet. That day, you approach Big Sister under the guise of requesting more lute lessons. You offer her tea. You pour slowly. I heard there are rules, you say. For leaving? She doesn't blink. Yes. You wait. She continues. Marriage is the official route. Contract buyout. Must be witnessed. Notarized. House gets a percentage. Not negotiable. And the unofficial routes? She finishes her tea, then looks at you, long and quiet. If I knew of any, she says, they wouldn't be unofficial, would they? Which is not an answer, and somehow, exactly an answer. That night, a former courtesan returns to the house, briefly, as a guest. She wears gold now, real gold. Her sleeves embroidered with cranes and cloud motifs. She walks like someone who's practiced being admired. Her laughter has the rhythm of rehearsed ease. She sits with Snow Lantern for hours. No one interrupts. Later, Snow Lantern tells you, her name is something else now, Lady Joe. She looks happy, you say. She looks practiced. Snow replies, you begin testing small escape plans of your own. Not real ones. Not yet. Just simulations. You count your coins. Imagine who you'd write to, how far you could get in a hired carriage, whether you could pass as a scholar's niece. One night, you hide a week's wages in your shoe lining, just to see how it feels. It feels heavy. You also begin listening to new whispers about a courtesan named Fragrant Lily in a nearby district who left the house life and now writes poems anonymously. Her verses appear in printed folios, credited only to Daughter of the Night Wind. You recognize her style, sad and sharp and endlessly quiet. Historians still argue whether courtesans truly ever escaped, whether their freedom was real or just a different cage, whether marriage was rescue or rebranding. But here, in this house where walls hear and curtains blink, you begin to understand. Freedom isn't just about getting out. It's about choosing what you do with your voice After the music fades, you don't have a plan yet, but you start to prepare one, not out of desperation, but because you want options. You write a new verse, just for your folio. The door is open, only when you know which foot to lead with. You don't date it, but you do underline it twice. You first hear your name sung in the streets by someone you've never met. It happens on a rainy morning, just after breakfast, when you're sent to fetch a delivery of plum wine from the vendor across the lane. You pass two apprentices, balancing bamboo baskets on a shoulder pole. One hums a melody. The other sings softly, half mocking, half awed. Plum Blossom's glance breaks porcelain hearts. You don't flinch, but your pulse flutters like a startled sparrow. By the time you return to the house, the other courtesans are waiting. Magpie raises an eyebrow. So, you're famous now? You shrug. I didn't write the lyric. Snow Lantern laughs. You didn't have to. Reputation here is a wind, invisible, unpredictable, and fast. One moment you're a name scrawled at the bottom of a guest list. The next you're on the lips of people you've never poured tea for. And the more they speak, the more they embellish. Soon, the stories come back to you, some true, some wild fiction. You supposedly outwitted a minister in a riddle contest. You healed a scholar's heartbreak with one poem. You tamed a tiger with a fan flick. You've never even seen a tiger. You learn not to correct them, because now you're not just a courtesan, you're a persona. And that changes everything. Guests begin requesting you days in advance. Daughters of officials beg their mothers to describe your hairpins. Merchants bring you scrolls just to watch you comment on them. Once, an elderly poet asks to hear your laughter before he dies. You oblige. He lives another 6 months. Big Sister pulls you aside. Careful, she warns. Legends shine brighter than people, but they also burn faster. You understand. You adjust. You become your legend without losing yourself inside it. You begin preparing your verses ahead of time, not to impress, but to be quotable. You select your robes with intent. Tonight, blue silk for restraint. Tomorrow, vermilion for courage. You tell stories in fragments, never full. Let them fill in the mystery. You speak in metaphor even when asked for facts. How long have you been here? A little longer than your shadow lasts at dusk. What do you dream of? A cup of tea I haven't poured yet. Guests eat it up. They repeat your words to others. You catch one trying to mimic your speech to impress another girl. It's laughable, but flattering. You are becoming more than a name on the scroll. You are Plum Blossom, the girl with the fan of riddles, the courtesan who never loses her temper, or her footing, or her truth. At least, not in public. Privately, you still write, now with more intention. Your folio grows thick. You begin editing older entries, refining your voice. You no longer write just to remember. You write to last. One night, a guest returns with one of your verses inked into a fan, not copied, tattooed. His fan is carved with sandalwood, painted in lacquer, the verse etched with care. A petal falls not from gravity, but because it is ready. You don't remember writing that one. He leaves it as a gift. You don't keep it in your room. You place it in the tea hall, behind glass. Soon, after, another gift arrives, an embroidered screen with your likeness stitched in gold and silver thread. The face is a little too perfect. the hands too poised, but the resemblance is undeniable. You leave it wrapped for days. You finally display it on a quiet morning, behind the east window, where the light makes the threads shimmer just a little too much. Moth Orchid watches you unwrap it. "Congratulations," she says. "You're officially art." You reply, "I'd rather be a poem." She smiles. Too late. Now you're both. Guests begin leaving behind more than coins. A hairpin carved with your name. A box of inkstones from the Capitol. A letter of marriage proposal from a retired general, wrapped in silk, sealed with wax, written in trembling, hopeful calligraphy. You decline, gently. Snow Lantern tells you later. Decline enough, and even rejection becomes reputation. And now, you begin to consider what that means, or you're no longer someone who might escape. You're someone who could be remembered. Historians still debate which courtesans truly became legends, which ones had poems written about them, painted portraits commissioned, or dances choreographed in their honor. Most names are lost, erased or misspelled or absorbed into myth. But here, standing beneath a lantern bearing your emblem, reciting a poem you wrote last week that someone else has already claimed as theirs, you understand. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what people think they remember. So you sharpen your fan work. You lean into mystery. You practice answering questions with riddles and saying goodbye with verses. And one night, after a performance that earns 3 standing ovations and a bowl of silver coins you don't count, Big Sister hands you a slip of paper. It's from a patron. Anonymous. Just 3 words. You are eternal. You don't respond, but you press the note between the pages of your folio, next to your real name, still written only once. It starts subtly. First, a missed compliment. A guest addresses the newer girl beside you, though you were the one who made the clever turn of phrase. Then, a poem you wrote, clearly yours, is quoted back to you by a young official, except he attributes it to Azure Peach. You don't correct him, but your smile is thinner that evening. Fame is a tide. It comes in without warning, and it recedes even faster. You'd always known this. Every courtesan in the house knows this. You've watched it happen to others, how the laughter dims, how invitations slow, how the compliments begin to sound like nostalgia. Now, you're beginning to feel it in the spaces between applause. Your fan doesn't flutter as smoothly. Your rouge needs a little more blending. The little creases beside your eyes, they catch powder differently now. You aren't old, not by any measure, but newer blossoms bloom nightly. Magpie says it softly one evening while fixing your hair. They've started asking for lotus leaf. She does your old eyebrow trick. You nod. She's very sweet, Magpie adds. More gently, she should be, you reply. She hasn't been tested yet. You say it with a smile, but your heart is elsewhere. You begin to practice more. Stay up later. Reread your old verses. Try new ones. You shift your robe styles. Darker, richer tones, less playful, more stately. You change your signature scent from Plum Blossom to Agarwood. One night, a guest says, "You smell azzy, a." You reply, "I've burned longer." Still, the shift is unmistakable. Snow Lantern notices. She takes you aside in the garden one dawn, where the dew slicks the stepping stones and the air is quiet enough to hear birds before the city stirs. "You're no longer what they desire," she says. "You're what they respect." It's not cruel. It's a compliment, in her own way. "They'll still ask for you," she continues, "but to advise..." to inspire, not to chase. Oh, you ask, and what then? Then you decide whether to become dangerous or dignified. Some courtesans reinvent themselves. Ink Bell, now older than most in the house, has taken on the role of mentor, never performing, but always listening. Guests speak to her like she's a priestess. They bring her secrets in lieu of poems. Others fade, quietly, slip behind the screens, train younger girls, tend to perfumes, inventory, ledgers. Their names remain, but their voices are rarely heard. One vanishes entirely. No farewell, no story, just an empty mat the next morning. The room is reassigned within a day. Historians still argue whether courtesans had control over their twilight years, whether they aged into reverence or resentment. But inside the house, you know this much. Age doesn't steal you, it reveals you. And you choose transformation. You stop trying to outshine the younger girls. You begin to host instead of dazzle, facilitate conversations, introduce the rising stars, offer poems only when requested. You become the elegant constant, the hand that steadies the room, the smile that quiets tensions. You even begin teaching fan language to the trainees. Lotus Leaf thanks you profusely. Her hands shake as she practices a flutter. You don't mind? She asks. That they ask for me now? You shake your head. They'll ask for someone else after you. That's the way of seasons. Later, you cry. Just a little. Not because you're forgotten, because you're changing. You still have admirers, patrons, poets who owe you their best lines, but the heat has cooled. You no longer ignite a room. You warm it. One evening, you sit beside a guest you used to perform for, and he says, "You're quieter than I remember." You respond, "I've said everything I meant to. The rest is echo." He toasts to that. The new girls ask your advice. You tell them the truth, gently. That beauty is a lantern, but wisdom is the oil. That you must choose what to keep when the audience leaves. That silence is a choice, not a punishment. You begin copying your poems into a clean folio, not just scraps and verses, but the full body of your work. You add dates, you annotate meanings, you include verses you never dared perform, even one from the night in the red chamber. You write a dedication to the girl behind the screen. May she one day walk past it. You sign it with your real name, the same one written once, at the very back of your secret folio. Only now, you place that name at the front, not hidden, claimed, because you're no longer the mystery, you're the myth. The portraits come first. You see the artists arrive with scrolls and silk and brushes sealed in wax paper. They are not ordinary painters. They speak little, observe much, and smell faintly of cedar and lacquer. One of them follows you for a week, sketching in corners, never asking questions. You catch him mimicking your gestures with his fingers, measuring the lift of your sleeve, the tilt of your head. He disappears before you can ask his name. Then one evening, in the main hall, the screens are rolled back. And there you are, painted, not entirely accurate, your eyes are slightly too wide, your waist impossibly narrow, but the expression is unmistakable, thoughtful, quiet, watching something just outside the frame. The guests applaud, you bow, but inside, something turns, because you're still here, and she, the painted version, is not. You've become a legend now, a symbol, a story with edges smoothed by retelling. And while others admire your image, you're still scrubbing rouge out of silk and listening to whispers behind fans. It's not bad, but it's strange, especially because now they come asking for your opinion. Ministers request your thoughts on poetry anthologies. Young courtesans ask you to revise their verses. One guest even brings a foreign coin and asks, "What story does this face tell you?" You reply, "One of distance and unfamiliar promises." He nods like you've solved a riddle. You're still invited to perform, but now it's different. You're the final act, the closer, the woman they bring out when the room needs gravity. Let her speak last, Big Sister says. She'll say what no one else can. And you do. Your poems are shorter now, sharper. You no longer decorate each verse with metaphors. You don't need to. One evening, a scholar praises your latest couplet, claiming it holds the sorrow of 10 lifetimes. You smile and say, "That's generous. I've only lived 6. He doesn't laugh. He bows. Another night, you're invited to a private gathering of officials, no music, no performance, just quiet discussion. They debate policy, philosophy, border tensions, and they ask you what the people feel, not just the scholars or the nobles, the people, and you tell them, softly, deliberately, like offering tea that's too hot to drink quickly. Later, Big Sister tells you, "Be careful, they listen now." You nod. You've noticed. You receive a request from the capital, an invitation to visit a royal residence, advise a cousin of a noble house on court manners and poetic diplomacy, a soft offer, a new kind of cage. You don't accept, you don't decline, you delay, because you're waiting for something else, not an invitation, not an escape, a decision. One night, Lotus Leaf brings you a fan she's painted herself. It bears your most famous couplet in gold ink, the paper shaped like a plum blossom. She offers it with both hands and says, "Thank you for not fading when you could have." You accept it, but you don't open it. You just press it to your heart for a moment and nod. Historians write about courtesans who changed the course of dynasties. Some married emperors, others guided generals. One, it's said, convinced a scholar to burn his own writings to preserve hers. You don't want any of that. You want to remain. To be remembered not because you escaped, or dazzled, or disappeared, but because you said things worth echoing. That night, in your room, you light a single candle and open the clean folio. You add a new entry. "If I must be seen, let it be in full. Paint me flawed, paint me real, but above all, paint me still speaking." Then, for the first time, you unroll your oldest verse, the very first one you wrote on the back of a fan, years ago. You smile at how nervous the brushwork looks. You do not change it. You simply add, beneath it, a single line, "Still here." The night you stop performing feels no different from the ones before. There's no ceremony, no announcement. You dress as usual, paint your face as usual, knot your sash as usual, but you do not go to the hall. You sit quietly in the garden instead, beneath the half-lit lanterns, sipping lukewarm tea and listening to the sound of sandals tapping across stone. Guests pass. Courtesans laugh. Music wafts from behind gauze curtains, soft and familiar, a melody you once played, a poem you once performed. You feel no sorrow, only stillness, and then relief. You were not forced out. You were not erased. You chose this. That makes all the difference. Big Sister finds you there, as she always does. She sits beside you without asking. Her fan rests unopened in her lap. "You'll take the West Wing," she says. "It's quiet. You'll sleep alone." You nod. "Train the new ones. Not all of them. Just the ones worth teaching." You nod again. She rises, pauses, then adds, "Don't soften your edges too much. Let them earn it." You smile. "Of course." From that night on, you become the quiet center of the house. You speak less, but your words weigh more. Your advice is asked for, never offered. You walk slower. People wait for you. And when you do perform, rarely, it's different. A single song, a single verse, no fanfare, no flirtation, just your voice, shaped by memory. The younger courtesans study you closely now. They mimic your tone, your posture, your silences. They ask for the story behind each line in your folio. You never tell them all of it, only what's useful. One evening, Lotus Leaf confesses, "Sometimes I think about leaving, becoming someone else, somewhere quieter." You hand her a poem, one you never performed. There are names we borrow, and names we become. The trick is knowing when to answer to neither. She reads it in silence, then bows. She doesn't leave. But she stops mimicking your fan flick, and that's enough. You continue writing, even when your brush trembles slightly from the chill in your fingers. You fill pages with verses about teacups, aging candles, and the weight of staying. The house changes. Girls come and go. The walls are repainted, the roof retiled, but your room stays the same. So do you. One rainy morning, a scholar visits, not a patron, just a quiet man with too many scrolls and a reverent gaze. He asks to read your collection. You let him. He returns 3 days later, eyes shining, and asks, "May I copy them?" "No," you say, "but you may remember them." He does. Months later, your verses appear in a published folio titled Echoes of the Hidden Plum. The author is listed simply as "a name once spoken." You don't mind. You never wanted to be known, only heard. The seasons shift. The lanterns are lit earlier. The silk moths come sooner. You sleep more, speak less. Sometimes you write a line and forget it moments later. Sometimes you wake and forget who asked for your poem last night, but your body still remembers the weight of the fan. Your fingers still trace characters in the air before you reach for ink, and in the final page of your folio, you write one last verse. "I danced, but not for you. I sang, but not to please. I stayed." And that was the boldest poem of all. You place the brush down, and finally, rest. The teahouse grows quiet now. The lanterns burn low. The guests have gone. The last teacups are rinsed and stacked. And the perfume has faded into something softer, something almost like memory. You lie back on the warm mat in your little west room. It's smaller than the one you started in, but quieter. The floorboards no longer creak when you walk. The screens flutter just slightly with the breeze, and for the first time in years, you sleep without your fan at your side. Outside, the garden is blooming again, late plum blossoms, defiant against the chill. Somewhere downstairs, a new courtesan is reciting a line you wrote a decade ago. She doesn't know it's yours. That's all right. You close your eyes. The teahouse doesn't miss your voice. It remembers it, in the rhythm of footsteps on lacquered floors, in the sound of laughter behind curtains, in the silence after a perfect verse. You were never the loudest, never the most dazzling, but you endured. And there, in the stillness, your story is still unfolding, just in softer ink, in longer pauses, in shadows that stretch like poetry across the floor. So sleep now. Let the last lanterns dim. Let the silk rest. You were seen. You were heard. You were real. And that is more than enough. End of script. Sweet dreams.